بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. We'll be continuing with our series, inshallah, the Eyes On series, where we're going to be focusing on a different section of the world where Muslims are being persecuted or have history of the persecution. And today we're going to be focusing on our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan. They are known as the Uyghurs, or the Uyghurs is how it's properly pronounced. And I'll use both of them, but I will try my best to stick with Uyghurs because this is the way that it's pronounced and just how we want to have our name pronounced and our Islam, Muslim, our names, our nationalities, everything we want it to be pronounced correctly. So out of respect for them, we'll pronounce it properly as well, inshallah. The Uyghur people have a long history going back centuries. They are a Turkic people and they primarily reside in the eastern region of what was once known as Turkestan, a region of Central Asia that is between Siberia in the north, Tibet, India, Afghanistan, and Iran in the south, the Gobi Desert in the east, and the Caspian Sea on the west. It covers modern-day Turkic countries, including Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. East Turkestan is the easternmost region of that area that was bordered by China, Mongolia, Tibet, Russia, Pakistan, India, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. China claims this region as the Xinjiang province of China. Xinjiang in the Chinese language means new frontier or new territory. It is also known as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, although most Uyghurs prefer to be referred to as China-occupied East Turkestan. For the Uyghurs, to refer to this region of Xinjiang is the same as referring to Palestine as Israel. So just as we would never call Palestine Israel, we should also not call East Turkestan Xinjiang. But if anybody says Xinjiang, they mean East Turkestan. And if we talk about East Turkestan, they mean Xinjiang, same thing. The native people of East Turkestan primarily consist of Turkic ethnic groups such as the Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and Kyrgyz people, with Uyghurs being the majority. East Turkestan is a very large area. It's 3 times the size of France. It has a lot of its own natural resources. It has oil and gas, and a large part of the world's cotton is actually from there. And that's why China is actually so intent on keeping that region. They want to have that region under their control because of its many natural resources. Uyghur history is disputed between Uyghur groups and historians and Chinese authorities. According to Uyghur historians, their history goes back between 4,000 to 9,000 years. Because of the Chinese state restriction on the flow of information in and out of East Turkestan, especially coming out of East Turkestan, and not being able to gather full, current, or historical information and data, detailed accounts of modern East Turkestani history are very difficult to come by. We still have information, though, available, although a lot of information from the time the Chinese occupied East Turkestan is disputed. But what I've gathered is I've tried to do my best to gather the most accurate information I could. If we're going to go back to the 7th century, the Uyghurs at that time lived in Mongolia, and during this time they were under the control of the Gokturks, who had established the Turkic Khaganate in 682 CE, which was a massive empire. In 744, the Uyghurs, along with the Besmils and the Karluks, 2 other Turkic tribes, overthrew the Gokturks, and the Uyghurs eventually overpowered these other 2 groups and established the Uyghur Khaganate. And this empire lasted from 744 until 840, so almost 100 years. Up until this point, the Uyghurs were not Muslim. They were Buddhist, and they also adhered to Tengrism. And then in the 8th century, in the middle of the 8th century, is when things began to shift, and the Uyghur Khaganate converted to Manichaeism. In the 9th century, the Uyghur Khaganate fell to the Yenisei Kyrgyz. The Uyghurs then migrated south and they split into two groups. One of these groups settled in the Hexi corridor, and this is what is modern day Gansu province of China. And they formed the Gansu Uyghur Kingdom, and their descendants, they're known as the Yellow Uyghurs. They're also known as Uyghurs, but spelled with a Y, so Yugurs. So this is a second group of Uyghurs from the ones that we're talking about, and they're still there today. And those Uyghurs are not Muslim. They actually still follow Tibetan Buddhism. And the second group of the Uyghurs established the Kocho Kingdom in the Tarim Basin, where they were influenced by the Sogdians, Tocharians, and others, and they still practiced a mix of religions, including Buddhism, Manichaeism, and even Nestorian Christianity. It was in the 10th century that Islam began to spread through the region, and this was under the Karakhanids, another Turkic group. And over time, the Tarim Basin began to become majority Muslim. The area fell under Mongol rule, and later the Chagatai Khaganate. And actually, this Chagatai Khaganate were the offshoot of the Mongols, but they were Muslim Mongols. So after the Genghis Khan Mongol Empire, they actually had a Muslim Mongol Empire as well. And it was during this Chagatai Khaganate which solidified both Islam and the Chagatai language among the Uyghurs by the 15th century. In 1705, the region came under the Zungars before being conquered by the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty is now the Chinese Republic. So the Qing dynasty were a Chinese dynasty. And when the Qing dynasty conquered the region, they carried out a genocide of the Zungars to establish control. 500,000 Zungars were wiped out. They massacred them. The Uyghurs retained some autonomy under the Kumul Khanate, and the king engaged in a lot of heavy resettlement and colonization. So this colonization of the Uyghurs and East Turkestan began from 1705, or when the Qing dynasty conquered that area. That's from the moment that they occupied that time, they began to colonize the region. They did a lot of heavy resettlement and colonization. They took Uyghurs and they put them in other parts of China, and they took others from the Qing dynasty and they put them there. So they wanted to displace the population. And then in 1884 is when at that time it's China, but not the China we know today. So it was called the Qing dynasty. They named the region Xinjiang at that time in 1884. The late 19th and early 20th century saw repeated uprisings and struggle for independence by the Muslims, including there was an adventurer slash leader. His name was Yaqub Beg, and he had a short-lived Kashgar state from 1860 to 1870. So not that long ago, like not too far in the past, just a couple of hundred years ago. And after that, the Qing dynasty fell in 1912, and then came the rise of the Chinese Republic. And when this Chinese Republic rose, the Uyghur call for autonomy grew stronger and marked the beginning of the modern phase of Uyghur resistance against Chinese rule. And just a note, this Kashgar state of Yaqub Beg's actually led in this time, 1860 to 1870, it was actually recognized by other countries as well. So even the British Empire recognized it. And eventually, though, the Qing dynasty destroyed it and took over the area again. And after that, it led to a period in which the Uyghurs, there were two groups of Uyghurs. There was Uyghurs who supported the new Chinese Republic and those who were opposed to them. Those against the Chinese often found support from the Soviet Union. And because the Soviets, they wanted to expand their own influence. And they saw the Chinese Republic as their enemy. And so they thought, okay, there are these guys here. So if we support them, they can be our buffer against the Chinese Republic. And the Soviet Union armed militias of ethnic minorities in the area, including the Uyghurs. Uyghur and Turkic national identity began to develop following the establishment of modern schools by Uyghur and Turkic Jadits, which is their Turkic name for reformers, and they focused on technical areas of study such as science, mathematics, history, and language studies. And the power of education as a tool for personal and national development was emphasized, and this led to the national awakening in the early 1920s. The Han Chinese rulers who governed East Turkestan became increasingly autocratic. They began to establish policies to assimilate all of those in the region to the Han Chinese culture, language, and norms. They even removed local Uyghur leaders from power and replaced them with Han Chinese officials. The people of East Turkestan were prohibited from participating in Hajj and from practicing their religion. So they wanted to make sure they wipe out any trace of Uyghur culture, of Islam. They wanted just Han Chinese culture, language, religion, customs. That's all they wanted. This is now China, and we're going to have only Chinese culture here. In the 1930s, or in 1930 actually, the Chinese warlord Jin Shuren began to seize the land of Uyghur farmers and gave them to Chinese colonists from Gansu. And he resettled the Uyghurs into poor quality areas and heavily taxed them. And then by 1931, resistance movements emerged in response to this, and a full-scale rebellion broke out in February 1931. This rebellion began to spread across East Turkestan. In 1932, an Uyghur intellectual and reformer returned to East Turkestan from India and persuaded a wealthy family to support a rebellion against the Chinese rule. And by 1933, the city of Khotan and the surrounding area was actually freed from Chinese rule. And this led to the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan being formed. Now it's known as the First East Turkestan Republic, but in that time it was the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan. So it was an Islamic Republic.
Which they still exist today.
No, so that's why it was. This was in 1933, the Islamic Republic of East Turkestan. Now it's known as the First East Turkestan Republic, and it didn't last long, unfortunately. It lasted less than a year, I believe. Yeah, it lasted just under a year. This East Turkestan Republic claimed its base around the Tarim Basin, as well as other parts of the areas where the Uyghurs lived, and some areas of Chinese Xinjiang, where the Chinese had taken over as a majority. Unfortunately, this was very short-lived, and the Republic came under attack from the government of China, and Soviets, for their own reasons, also got concerned and invaded East Turkestan and assisted Han Chinese in taking control of East Turkestan. Unfortunately, and this is something actually I want to make a key point on. In Islamic history, a lot of the times you want everything to be very simple. This is the good guys and this is the bad guys, and everything is black and white, and there's no complexity. But throughout Islamic history, from the time of Uthman radiallahu anhu, from the time of Abu Bakr, from the time of Abu Bakr, things are not so black and white and so simple. And we can't look at Islamic history thinking, well, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, and there's good Muslims, and then there's everybody else who's murtad, or there's this group, and then all the other groups are against them. It's more complicated than that. If you look really with open eyes in Islamic history, you'll find there were Muslims fighting against Muslims. Not kuffar or murtad or munafiqs fighting against Muslims. Muslims fighting against Muslims. This happened with Ali radiallahu anhum. We find that Muawiyah and Ali radiallahu anhum, they had differences, and Sahaba were fighting Sahaba. And none of them from each side, from Ali radiallahu anhu's side or Muawiyah radiallahu anhu's side, would say that the other side are now, they left Islam, they make takfir on them. No, they were fighting them physically in battle, but they still wouldn't say that they're not Muslim. And we have to keep that in mind when we talk about Islamic history and when we study Islamic history as well.
Can I ask a question about that? If they're fighting each other, both are Muslim, what happens to the dead? Are they considered shuhada, or are they like? Is it?
We leave that with Allah. We leave that with Allah. Coming back to this, so as I was saying, that the Soviets now were backing the Han Chinese against the Uyghurs, the Turkic groups who were in East Turkestan. Unfortunately, there were Hui Chinese Muslims who also joined the fight against East Turkestan, the East Turkestan Republic, and they were fighting under the command of the Republic of China. The city of Kashgar was overrun, and approximately 8,000 Uyghurs were killed by Hui Chinese Muslim forces. So this is why I'm saying that Islamic history is not very black and white. It's not simple. The Islamic Republic of East Turkestan came to an end in 1934, and then East Turkestan was governed by a Chinese warlord. His name was Sheng Shikai, and he had a lot of Soviet help. And he ruled from 1934 to 1943. In 1937, there were Uyghur uprisings whose goal was restoring East Turkestan independence. However, this warlord Sheng began a great purge, and he imprisoned, executed Uyghurs and other Turkic leaders, scholars, anybody he thought is a threat to him. And under his rule, East Turkestan and his people were subject to brutal repression, similar to what we see today. Approximately 200,000 Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples were arrested and executed under Sheng's rule. Kazakhs in the Altai region of East Turkestan began to rebel against Sheng's rule in the Koktokai rebellion in 1941. By the end of 1941, there was widespread discontent among the Turkic people in East Turkestan, which resulted in more calls for independence, and those calls began to get very strong. Now, although the Soviet Union initially was very closely allied with Sheng took advantage of Soviet setbacks against the war against the Germans and shifted back towards the Republic of China, and he began to expel all the Soviet personnel from the area in 1942. And for their own reasons again, Soviet Union began to abandon its policy of supporting China and Sheng, and actually began again supporting the Turkic national independence movement. In 1944, a rebellion against China broke out in East Turkestan, and by the middle of the 1944, the rebels began to have a more cohesive group. By the end of 1944, the rebellion captured the city of Gulja and formed the East Turkestan Republic, and it's now called the Second East Turkestan Republic. And the primary goal of this republic was to free themselves from the Chinese rule and have the entirety of East Turkestan, not just one small city or a few cities, and have the entire region be its own independent state, and for them to have the right of self-determination, the ability to decide their own future for themselves, to practice their religion as they wanted to practice it. And this second republic was actually even more organized than the first. They had their own national army, they had a judicial system, they had their own currency, and this currency was known as the East Turkestan dollar. So it was very, very organized. From the time the East Turkestan National Army was formed in 1945, the East Turkestan Republic carried on fighting the Chinese army and worked to spread and liberate the rest of East Turkestan. Unfortunately, in September of 1945, Soviet military advisors started to put pressure on the East Turkestan Republic leadership to stop all of their military campaign. They wanted them to just cut it out. The East Turkestanis, they tried to reject this pressure and continued their attempt to liberate all of East Turkestan. And what they didn't know was that behind closed doors, the Soviet Union and China had made their own arrangements and made their own deal. And they revealed this deal when they signed the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship in August 1945. And the Soviet Union promised China that they're going to stop giving aid to the East Turkestan Republic, and they gave the Republic of China the green light to do what you want. You want to go and take it over, go ahead. The Soviets also began pressuring the East Turkestan Republic's leadership to enter peace negotiations with China. The East Turkestani leadership became divided, and there were some who opposed this and some who were in favor of these peace negotiations. Those who were opposed, they said these negotiations were betraying the Uyghur people, we're betraying the people of East Turkestan, we're betraying the revolution, everything we have achieved is going to make it go to waste. And the ones who wanted to make a peace agreement with China, they possibly thought that it might give East Turkestan more room to negotiate and for more benefit, and China would give them some independence. Peace talks were had and some treaties were signed. China appointed their own governor to East Turkestan, even sent Hui Muslims who were loyal to China into East Turkestan with the job of turning the population against the East Turkestani Republic. They wanted to convince people that they would gain autonomy under Chinese rule and it would be better for them than independence. So if you're part of China, you'll have full autonomy. Don't worry about it. You'll just be part of us, and it's going to be better for you than having full independence. That's what they wanted to convince the Turkestani people. With Soviet help, over the next few years, China began to dominate East Turkestan and diminish the East Turkestan Republic government's power until there was almost nothing left. In August 1949, 5 members of the East Turkestan Republic's senior leadership were called to a meeting in Moscow. The plane that they were in crashed, and there were no survivors. So, quote unquote, crashed, and there were no survivors. This was the official story, that the plane was going and something happened, that the plane crashed, everybody on board died. After the Soviet Union dissolved, there were some KGB generals and high officers that revealed the leaders were actually killed on the orders of Joseph Stalin after being tortured for 3 days. So they said that the plane made it. They made it to Russia, but they got captured immediately, and the leaders were tortured and then killed. In East Turkestan, approximately 30 other senior leaders were arrested by the Soviets and disappeared. With the Soviet help, China occupied East Turkestan, ended the East Turkestan Republic in 1949. And in 1949 is when the East Turkestan was fully annexed to the Republic of China. After the Chinese occupation, there was still resistance carrying on. There were still people who said, no, we're not going to stand by and do nothing. So the Uyghurs still had resistance, but they were brutally suppressed. By 1954, approximately 150,000 Uyghurs and Turkic Muslims were killed, and all this took place in just the first 5 years of Chinese occupation. The Chinese government managed to control all of East Turkestan and implement their colonial policies. They brought approximately 300,000 Han Chinese soldiers and their families to settle in East Turkestan. So this was a policy of displacement. We're going to bring our Han Chinese, we're going to put them in East Turkestan, and we're going to take the residents of East Turkestan and we're going to put them in other places of China, and we're going to work to suppress the Uyghurs and the Turkic groups who were there. And they wanted to colonize the land, take their natural resources, and stop any resistance. Many Uyghurs and Turkic leaders in the government became very upset because the Chinese government, they allowed still some Uyghur and Turkic leaders in the government in some positions. So they became very upset with this Chinese rule and wrote many letters urging the Chinese government to keep their promise and allow what they called Xinjiang to have their autonomy. Chairman Mao responded by designating East Turkestan as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in 1955. He also gave some Uyghur and Turkic people some high positions in this quote-unquote autonomous region. This region is autonomous only in name. Even today, they will say the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It's only autonomous in name, not in practice. Over the next decade, the Chinese government took a brutal approach to crushing any pushback, any defiance, or any signs of rebellion or resistance against their rule. In the 60s, there was a resurgence of the independence movement of East Turkestan. There were anti-Chinese protests, and this ended up leading to a mass exodus of Uyghurs and Turkic people to the Soviet Union in 1962 because they needed to escape from the Chinese oppression. In the 1970s, there was a severe crackdown from the Chinese government aimed at stopping and dismantling the East Turkestan resistance movement. They assassinated the key figures in the resistance movement, and these assassinations were a huge blow to the East Turkestani resistance. In the 1980s, there was an increase in cultural expression of East Turkestani nationalism, with literature, music, and art becoming methods of resistance and of preserving the East Turkestani and the Uyghur identity. And even in spite of the repression, the spirit of hope for a free East Turkestan and the spirit of resistance, it was kept strong and kept moving forward, and it kept the movement forward as well. In 1990, there was a very critical moment in this East Turkestani independence movement in the form of the Baron Uprising. The Baron Uprising was a response to the forced abortion of Uyghur babies in the Baron Township, a village in East Turkestan. Around 200 people held demonstrations and demonstrated and protested against the Chinese policy of forced abortions, mass migration of Han Chinese to displace the Uyghur and the Turkic population, and religious oppression. One of the cries of the protesters was, "Marxism suppressed Islam. Now it is our turn to suppress Marxism." So these protesters, they were Muslim. They still had an Islamic identity. The government's response was brutal. More than 50 people were shot dead on the spot, and the rest of them or most of them were arrested. And those who were arrested, most of them were tortured to death in Chinese prisons. People retaliated, and over 2,000 people went out in the streets, and they began to attack police stations, and they attacked government buildings, and they even managed to capture weapons and capture some Chinese soldiers. Some protesters were also captured by the Chinese military. Eventually, the villagers and the Chinese, they did a hostage exchange. So you release our villagers, and we'll release your soldiers. This uprising lasted 7 days, and it ended because the Chinese government sent their army with tanks and warplanes into the Baron village. So this is one village, and they sent tanks and warplanes with the army, and they massacred the entire village. Men, women, children, with the protest, not involved in the protest, it didn't matter to them. They wiped the village out. There was a Chinese soldier who was part of this massacre, and he ended up fleeing to the United States years later, and then he came forward to expose this massacre. And he explained that from what his own eyes, what he saw is they just killed everybody. In the 1990s, the East Turkestan independence movement gained momentum. The fall of the Soviet Union and the new independence of Central Asian republics. So now we had the fall of the Soviet Union. You had now the rise of Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, these republics. So the Uyghurs and other East Turkestanis, they began to have some hope that maybe we can also be free and we can have our own republic as well. The Chinese government was not happy with that, and especially because numerous organizations were formed in this decade. So in the 90s, a lot of organizations were formed calling for East Turkestani independence, and the Chinese government was not happy with that at all. They responded by intensifying their repressive measures, began to crack down on Uyghur social gatherings, not gatherings where people are trying to plan things, just social gatherings. And they launched campaigns to counter independence, and they labeled anything that they didn't like. They said this is a threat to national security. After September 11th, 2001, there was a change in the world and what was they began to call the war on terror. So the Chinese government saw this new global narrative on terrorism as an opportunity. And they began to portray the East Turkestan independence movement as quote unquote Islamic terrorism, and began to use the same language the United States used against the Muslims in Afghanistan and Iraq and everywhere, basically. And they use the same labels and same language the United States used against the Uyghur Muslims and the East Turkestanis. Now, anything they did, they justified it. They're saying, no, we're combating. It's all counterterrorism. We're combating terrorism. We're combating Islamic terrorism. And they began to plant spies and agents in Uyghur communities outside of China or outside of East Turkestan. And they got them to act as activists. And their strategy was to weaken the East Turkestan independence movement by creating conflict and disagreement from inside. In 2009, now we're here basically at the modern era. What we're living in today. What we're living in today began in 2009. The Chinese persecution, oppression, and repression grew to the start of the genocide that we see. The first step in this escalation was on June 26th, 2009. At a factory in Shaoguan City in Guangdong province of China, there were around 800 Uyghur forced laborers or slave laborers who lived and worked in a factory. So as I mentioned, the Chinese would take Uyghurs and force them to be in other parts of China and force them to work in factories. And some had no choice because of how things were in East Turkestan, or what the Chinese called Xinjiang. They needed to make a living to provide for themselves and their families, so they had no choice but to go elsewhere, to go to other parts of China and work there. And they were like pennies on the dollar they were getting paid. They were slave labor. So there were 800 Uyghur laborers who lived and worked in a factory. And there were also Han Chinese who also lived and worked in this factory. According to Chinese reports, so these reports are the official Chinese reports, so we have to take them with a grain of salt because we cannot believe almost anything that they say. But according to the official Chinese reports, false rumors and allegations started to spread that two young Uyghur men were speaking with and flirting with some Chinese women. The Han Chinese, this made them crazy. It made them absolutely enraged. Their response was in the middle of the night. They broke into the dormitories, began pulling Uyghurs from their beds, chasing them, and beating them to death with clubs, knives, machetes, axes, metal rods. Until today, we don't know the true death toll and the scale of what happened. There were some videos that from that time they came out that were filmed by the Chinese because they were proud of what they're doing. Look, we're killing these Uyghurs. And these some of these things they came out, and you might be able to find some of the videos today, very brutal videos. And until today, we don't know the true extent. How many were killed, we don't know. And because the Chinese authorities are covering it up. They covered it up then, and they cover it up today. Uyghurs in East Turkestan refused to accept the Chinese regime's fabricated story. On July 25th, 2009, over 300 Uyghur students, university students, gathered on the streets of Urumqi, chanting for justice and demanding answers from the government. This everybody should remember. The Urumqi, this name Urumqi and the Urumqi massacre. When these students began to come out into the streets and demand answers from the governments, it started at 300 and it grew to thousands. The Chinese government's response was to send police, army, and plainclothes agents into the streets, into the middle of the protesters, and they caused this protest to become absolutely chaotic. Then they used that fact as an excuse to abduct, to beat up, and to execute Uyghurs throughout the night. Over the next day or two, the government also instigated the Han Chinese population to become a mob and start to attack the Uyghurs. They destroyed properties and businesses, and they were killing them by whoever they saw. They would catch them and kill them immediately. And until today, we also don't know the full scale of what happened and how many died. Possibly the best information that we have, the numbers of those killed were in the thousands. And this happened in just 2 days. For about a year after this, the Chinese government cut off internet into East Turkestan so that there's no information that could get out, and it would isolate the Uyghurs from the world. So this massacre happened in Urumqi, and then they cut the internet. Nobody can get any word out, any messages out, and nobody can see what's going on. Since that time, China's campaign of colonization, forced assimilation, and occupation intensified and reached new levels. And it is now the genocide that we can see today. Now we're going to talk about some of the suffering and the persecution that the Chinese regime has inflicted on the Uyghurs and the Turkish people in Turkestan. I mentioned in our last discussion about Kashmir that there's going to be a theme that we're going to see consistently as we talk about the different areas of the Muslim world and the persecution against them. And that is the similarities to what the Muslims have gone through. If we look back to what we talked about last time, you might remember we mentioned how the Indian government has torture centers and they fill them with men, with women and children. They torture them in every way you can imagine. They arrest them and they torture them as a means of making other people afraid. So if you speak up, that's it, you're gone. And they use this to terrorize the population. We also mentioned the concept of half widows. The half widow is a woman whose husband is taken and she doesn't know is he alive or he's dead. And they call them half widows because what is she? Is she now a full widow? If she's a full widow, okay, she can get married again. And she knows, like, the Islamic rulings, they know. But if your husband is gone, you don't know is he alive, is he dead, then what do you do? Can you get married again? Or not? What's the fatwa for this? What's the ruling for this? I want us to keep that in mind as we talk about what's happening with the Uyghurs. I just want to read one quote from a Chinese official. This is what he said in 2017 about the Uyghur and about the Muslims. This is his quote. He said, "Break their lineage, break their root, break their connection, break their origins. Completely shovel up the roots of the two-faced people, dig them out, and vow to fight these two-faced people until the end." So he is saying the Chinese stance for the Muslims, we need to destroy them. We cannot have any Muslims at all. We need to destroy them completely. The Chinese government consider Islam and practice of Islam as a virus, as an illness, and as deviant thought. And it stops the Uyghurs from assimilating and being one with China. Since the Qing dynasty took control of East Turkestan, the Republic of China has worked to subjugate the Uyghur and Turkic people in East Turkestan. And in the recent decades, they have done their best to destroy their language, their culture, any attempt to practice Islam. Today, China has more than 1 million Uyghurs in 300 to 400 concentration camps, where they torture them, they use them for forced labor, and they work to brainwash them. They say if they have any idea for Islam, this is a virus in your mind. So we have to destroy this virus. And we get some information about what happens in these camps from those who were able to escape and make it out, and they were able to leave into another country. They said that in a cell, there'll be 40 to 50 people in one small area. And this area is so small that they cannot all sleep at the same time. So if they want to sleep, they have to take turns. Some will sleep and some will stand. And then when the turn is over, they'll switch. They're not given any washrooms. They're given one bucket for 40 to 50 people to relieve themselves in. And this bucket is taken out once a day. They're injected with drugs. So they get injection of drugs. And they take their blood also because they want to have everybody's DNA. And we're going to actually talk about why they take their DNA. And when they enter into these camps, they take fingerprints, they take the retina scan, they take a face scan, they take medical records, they take their blood, and they do a full profile on them. So they know everything about every person who's inside. In these camps, women are forcibly sterilized so they cannot have children, and they are forced to have abortions. Women are even sterilized and given forced abortions outside of the camps so they can control the Uyghur people. And who are the people in these camps? Maybe you would think, okay, the people who are in these camps, they are the scholars, they are people who speak strongly about Islam, they are people who speak about jihad. It's anybody. Doctors, engineers, students, old men, old women, children, 10 years old, 14 years old, anybody at all. And their crime, maybe they have a sajada in their home. They find a sajada, a prayer mat in their home, this is a crime. They find they have a Quran, a mushaf in their home, this is a crime. Maybe they sent a video or a recording to a family member or a friend that's an Islamic lecture. This is a crime. You try to teach your kids something about Islam. This is a crime. Anything like this, and they will arrest you. They will take you anytime, in the day, in the night, it doesn't matter. The Chinese, they have their own version of what they say happened in these camps. They say, no, we're actually teaching them to be part of China. We're teaching them Chinese. We're giving them some job training. And we say we're taking the troublemakers and the terrorists and we're re-educating them to make them contributing members of society. We're teaching them new skills so they can go to work and do work. This is all lies. Everything they say is a lie. What actually happens is what I mentioned. The torture. They are held in these camps in classes. And in these classes, 4 or 5 hours in the day, they just watch Chinese propaganda. And they want to teach the people that Islam is wrong and communism is the right way. And they make the people, the Muslims, repent because they used to repent to Allah Azza wa Jal. They say, no, what you were doing, repenting to Allah, this is wrong. You have to repent to Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. So you have to make istighfar to Xi Jinping instead of Allah. They electrocute the prisoners. They starve the prisoners. They subject them to sleep deprivation. They rape them. They gang rape them also. The men and the women. They don't just rape the women. They rape the men also. Doesn't matter of their gender. For those who manage to leave East Turkestan and to leave the Chinese oppression, the government goes after their families and their friends. So, as a threat, if somebody he escapes or she escapes, they put a focus on their family who are still inside the country, who are still there. So if anybody speaks out, if we hear anything, we're going to take your family next. Your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your children. And they're going to be charged under terrorism. And what happens to the children of the parents who are taken in these camps? The children are taken and they're put in their own camps. So they have boarding schools, orphanages, or even preschools, but boarding preschools. And they take the children and put them in these schools.
Basically residential schools like here.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly how the residential schools in Canada here. And what happens in these schools? They are forced to forget their entire identity, their entire culture. They brainwash them. Anything they know about Islam, forget about this Islam. Forget about your language, forget about your culture. No, you are Chinese. You are a communist. You need to love China. You need to love communism and the Communist Party of China. They are taught communism is your religion. Xi Jinping, he is your God. And one of the things worse than this, worse than putting them in the boarding school, they take the Muslim children and they put them in other parts of China with the Chinese family, so that they are totally cut off from any Muslims. There is no Muslims around them. I saw a video when I was researching for this. It was a small child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and his name was Muhammad. He was in one of these boarding schools, and he's being questioned by the teacher. So the teacher is sitting in front of the class, and the students are there, and he brought this child in front, and he's asking him some questions. First, he asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Muhammad." And when he answered, he has to shout very loudly, "My name is Muhammad. What's your country?" "I am Chinese." The next question, he's asked, "Does he love China?" And he is brainwashed now, taught into thinking he has to say, "I love China." This small boy, he's our children. He's from our children. He's Muhammad. He is from us. Born into a Muslim, born into a Muslim family, named by his parents after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they love him more than they love themselves. And now he's in this school being brainwashed, taught to forget Islam, taught to forget everything he knows. We have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to stop this? East Turkestan is also the most surveilled area on earth. There is not an area on earth more surveilled than East Turkestan. They use technology to spy on every aspect of everybody's lives. We think we have good technology with our phones and the security that we have here, and we say, Canada is a very modern country. They have a lot of surveillance and they have very good technology. This is nothing. This is a joke. China has the best surveillance technology. They monitor people's electrical usage. How much electricity do you use? How much water do you use? How much internet do you use? How much phone do you use? They have cameras everywhere in the streets. You cannot go anywhere and there's not a camera. They use the GPS in people's phones to track them. They use the surveillance cameras and they take a scan for everybody's face, facial recognition technology and AI, artificial intelligence. They use it to track everyone. Where are they going? Where are they coming from? What are they doing? They have checkpoints everywhere. They even have a QR code on the homes of the Muslims, on their doors. They know where everybody lives, where they work, where they go to school. Now you might think this electrical usage, water usage, what's the point to track this? They track this, exactly. They track it to see, especially in Ramadan, who's fasting and who's not fasting. Because they'll see the electrical usage in Ramadan, maybe 2 a.m. is suhoor. So they're going to see who's home. The electrical usage now is open at 2 a.m. And there's water usage now at the suhoor time. And whose electrical usage and water usage is going up in iftar time, because now you're cooking food for iftar. So they see this. If they see, this house, there is more usage in the suhoor time and the iftar time, that means the people there are fasting. They go into the home, they take them, they throw them in the camp, because now they can tell he is fasting, this woman is fasting, this man is fasting, this family is fasting. And in Ramadan also, the Muslims who are working, they force them to eat and to drink, and they don't just force them to eat and drink. They force them to drink alcohol and to eat meat, to eat pork. And if they don't eat pork and they don't drink this alcohol, that's it. You're going in the prison. And they force them also, you need to go out with your Chinese co-workers, go and party, go to the club, go to the karaoke club, go to the bar, and enjoy yourself with them. And if you don't do that, this means you are too Muslim. You still have this idea of Islam in your mind. That's it. You have to go to the prison. And even for the students, the children in school, the whole year, there is nothing. In Ramadan, They give them now free lunch, only in Ramadan. And they watch who's not eating this lunch. If there's any student who's not eating this lunch, his family is practicing Muslim. So we have to pay them a visit. The Uyghurs and the Turkic population, they're not even able to choose their own jobs. The government assigns them jobs and then monitors their performance. And Muslims who perform poorly at their new job, they're taken and put into concentration camps. China uses their surveillance and technology to monitor the Uyghurs and the Turkic Muslims and gives them harsh prison sentences for, as I mentioned, something as simple as an Islamic recording, a religious recording to a family member. In 2017, according to the official statistics, so the number is actually higher, but this is the official statistics, Chinese statistics, arrests in East Turkestan accounted for almost 21% of all arrests in China, and this is even though East Turkestan population is only 1.5% of all of China. So they have 1.5% of the whole country, but 21% of the arrests are from East Turkestan. And this is according to the Chinese numbers, which means the real numbers are higher. Even if they hear somebody speaking their own language, this can be a reason for throwing them in prison, because this is a crime. You're speaking your own language? No, this is a crime now. Since 2017, the Chinese authorities have used every kind of excuse to damage and destroy 2/3 of the masajid in Turkestan. So they look for any masajid, any madrasa, any Islamic site throughout East Turkestan, and they destroy them. In May 2014, the Chinese government launched the Strike Hard campaign against violent terrorism in East Turkestan. So this is the name of their campaign, Strike Hard campaign against violent terrorism. And they focused it on the Uyghurs and the Turkic Muslims. Human Rights Watch found that research by Stanford Law School's Human Rights and Conflict Resolution Clinic, as well as their own research, as well as reports by other human rights organizations and other media, and even internal Chinese Communist Party documents showed the Chinese government has committed and continues to commit all of these crimes that I mentioned and crimes against humanity against the Turkic Muslims. And they are committing this genocide. Something that is extremely disgusting. In 2018, the Chinese came with a new policy. It's called a civil servant family pair up, also known as pair up and become a family. What this policy is the homes, the Muslim homes, where we took the men from it and threw them in the prison. So maybe there's a wife left and her children. They take a Chinese man and they put him in this home. He has to live with them. And he's a spy. He's watching them. Are they doing anything Islamic? Do they have a sajjada? Does the mother, is she teaching her kids anything about Islam? And he's a spy reporting back to the government. And he's a government worker. And they even go to the extent, this Chinese government worker, he will sleep in the same bed with the Muslim woman and force himself in the bed. And it goes to the extent that they end up raping these Muslim women, and not just the wives, even the children. They will rape the children also. And there are stories of girls as young as 12, 13, and 14 being raped. And this practice has led to many suicides of the Uyghur women because they don't know what to do. So they end up committing suicide, and they become pregnant from this Chinese man, and they go crazy. So they end up committing suicide because how can anybody live in this situation? There's also instances of Muslim Uyghur women being forced to marry a Han Chinese man. Our Muslim women in East Turkestan have become a ghanima for the Chinese. They take a Chinese officer or a soldier, and if he does very good work, then they go to the camp, the concentration camp where they have the woman arrested, and he gets to pick which one do you want to as your wife. which one do you want to marry? There's even women who are not from these camps who they register to marry with the Chinese soldier or the Chinese official because maybe if I do that, he will leave my family alone. If I put myself to marry him, the condition is, the price is, you leave my family alone. Can we even imagine something happening to one of our own family members, something like this? What is the fatwa for this? Who can give a fatwa for this? Who can talk to these women and tell them, this is the situation, this is what you can do? Like, this is an unimaginable thing. You die or you marry this Chinese man. Or you are forced now, they don't have a choice. This Chinese man is in their home now. Like, there's no option for them. What can they do? Things are so bad in East Turkestan for the Uyghurs. There were Muslim brothers who were in Guantanamo Bay from the Uyghurs. And we know about Guantanamo Bay, the torture that happened there by the Americans. They said, this is better for us than what's happening in the Chinese prisons. So the torture that was experienced by them in Guantanamo Bay is better for them than what was happening in the Chinese prisons. China also uses their international power, because they have a lot of economic power internationally, to pressure government to stay silent about the oppression and persecution of the Uyghurs. Especially they focus on the Muslim governments, or the Muslim majority, the governments of the Muslim majority countries. So the Arab countries, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia,
Kenya.
Any Muslim majority countries, they put more pressure on them to not talk, don't bring this discussion up. Don't talk about what's happening in East Turkestan. And unfortunately, these governments they bow to that pressure. There has been some movement and pressure from countries, including Canada, to speak out against what's happening in East Turkestan. So in the UK, there was a tribunal that investigated the actions of China, and they found that what they're doing to the Uyghurs is a crime against humanity. The United States blacklisted some Chinese officials and blocked some imports, like cotton, from East Turkestan. And the previous Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, stated China's actions were an effort to commit genocide. The United States State Department and parliaments of Canada and the Netherlands also determined that what China is doing constitutes genocide, and they put certain sanctions against them. But it's important for us to know that while some of these countries, like even Canada, have spoken out against what's happening against the Uyghurs by the Chinese, it's just words. They actually haven't done anything real, anything substantive, anything that you can point to and say this made a difference against the Chinese government. They use it as a bargaining chip. We need a better trade deal, so we're going to speak up against them. And then when we get a better trade deal, okay, we'll be quiet again. There may be some people who want to look down or to judge the Uyghurs because they see that maybe they're not very Islamically knowledgeable, or they're not very practicing. They'll see videos maybe of Uyghur women, even of those who left East Turkestan, without hijab, and they're dressed in short sleeve, and maybe they're dressed in jeans and just regular clothing like any Western person, and they'll make some comments about them, and they'll say like they're not proper Muslims, and we'll have this judgment against them. What we need to realize, though, is what the conditions are of our brothers and sisters and what they're going through. They are holding on to their Islam with their nails and with their teeth. For them to learn Islam, the risk is incredibly high. Some of them will even say, you know what's happening, or before 2023, October 7th, what was happening in Palestine, it was terrible. Nobody says it's not. Everybody will say it was a genocide from them. But the Uyghurs will say that was better. They would prefer to be in the place of those in Gaza than to be where they are before 2023. Why? In Gaza, they were able to still practice Islam. They actually had the highest rate of hafaz from the Muslims anywhere in the world, in Gaza. For the Uyghurs to learn any aspect of Islam, you risk your life. If I want to learn Al-Fatiha properly, I risk my life to learn Al-Fatiha. I want to learn the 5 pillars of Islam. I risk my life to learn the 5 pillars of Islam. If I'm caught teaching this, or if I'm caught learning this, you're not gonna see me again. That's it. They're gonna be in a camp, and they're gonna be tortured. They're gonna be forced to work in like slaves, and then they're gonna be killed. This is the situation. They have to learn the religion underground. They have to hide to learn the religion. They might be some Uyghur Muslims. The only thing they know of Islam is the Shahada. They know Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa Ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. And they know Tawheed. That's it. Not because they don't want to know more. This is all they're able to learn. You have a Chinese living in your home. You have the government watching you outside your house, tracking you on your phone, tracking you at work, tracking you in the street. There is nowhere you can go that they're not tracking you. So the only thing, they can't even pray. They have to just have their iman in their heart. That's all that they can have. So before anybody wants to speak against them or judge them very harshly, we need to know what they're going through. And we have to have a lot of forgiveness for them. Even the ones who have left East Turkestan and are outside, this is what they grew up with. They had this ingrained in them that you cannot learn Islam. And the only thing they know is Shahada and maybe a few basic things from Islam. So we have to have a lot of compassion for them and a lot of patience for them and a lot of forgiveness for them because of the unimaginable circumstances that they were in. One of the things, the Chinese, there's pictures of this, where the Chinese will see a Muslim woman, Uyghur woman, wearing a long dress. She's not wearing hijab, she's wearing a long dress. They will take scissors and cut her dress above the knees because they see this dress, she's trying to be modest, she's trying to be Muslim. We can't let that happen. What I was just mentioning, there's so much more to talk about. There is, we can spend 2 hours talking about what's happening with the Uyghur Muslims. One last thing, actually, I want to mention. There is something they call it halal, halal organ harvesting. What is halal organ harvesting? In these prisons of the Chinese, where they keep these Muslims, why do they get their DNA and they do a full medical workup? They know their blood type, they know their medical condition, they know everything about them. Their eyes, their fingerprints, all of this. Because they do a medical test on them. To see what their health condition is. And to see also how their organs are. And there are those from the Muslim countries, from the Muslims, so-called Muslims, especially from Saudi, from the Emirat, from the Arab states, the rich Arab states, they need an organ transplant. Maybe I need a new liver, I need a new kidney, I need one of my organs, something is wrong, I need a new organ. But I don't want an organ from a non-Muslim. So I need a halal organ. I need an organ from somebody, he never drank alcohol or ate pork. How is this halal? I don't know. But this is what they call it, a halal organ transplant. And they will pay the Chinese government money, or they will pay a Chinese official money. I need this organ. Here's my medical information. Find me a match. So they will go to the prison. They have a database. Who matches this man, or who matches this person? They will find from the Muslim prisoner the one who matches. They will kill them, take the organ, and send it to this Arab who rich Arab who needs an organ.
So they're munafiq. They're not just munafiq, they're murdering their own brothers and sisters.
Exactly. And there's just so much more to say, but we're gonna leave it there for now, and we'll move on to our next section, which is the last section, which is what can we do? Because it's not good enough that we sit here. Now we just heard all of this. What's happening to them? Their history. It's not good enough that we just learn and then we take it home and we say that's very sad. I wish something could be done, and we go and live our life like nothing happened. as Muslims, it is a wajib on us to do whatever we can to help our brothers and sisters who are suffering. So I'm going to mention a few ways that we can help them, inshallah. And many of the things I mentioned it last month when I was talking about Kashmir, and I'll mention it again next month. And if I mention it every single week, I won't be mentioning it enough. I won't be saying it too many times if I mention it every single week. The first thing that we need to do is to learn more about the situation in Turkestan. Like I said, what I mentioned today, the tip of the iceberg. I'm trying to cram as much information as I can in a short period of time. There are a lot of resources online that we can look to learn about what is happening there. There's YouTube videos, there's podcasts, there's websites, there's articles, there's interviews with Uyghurs who have come out of the concentration camps and were able to leave the country, and they describe what happened to them. There's many Uyghurs living in Turkey, for example, and they either themselves escaped from the camps or they have family members, so they can give information about what happened.
In Syria, we have
In Syria also.
Really?
more than around right now around maybe 200,000.
Yeah.
Around that.
So we need to do what we can to learn about the situation, because we can't help if we're ignorant about what's happening there. So the first step is to erase our ignorance with knowledge. These are our brothers and sisters, and it is obligatory on us to learn what they face. We can also make sure to spread the message of what is happening to the Uyghurs in person to the people that we know and online on social media. China is doing their best to keep a campaign of silencing voices of the Uyghurs and those who support them. So they have a propaganda machine, and anything anybody wants to say about them, they try and crush them. Somebody wants to speak about the Uyghurs, somebody wants to bring some information, they try and destroy that information and say, no. These are liars, these are terrorists, these are troublemakers, and they bring their own version of events. And they get very scared. We can't think that, what's a social media post going to do if I just post something on social media, if I share some information online, if I share information with people I know. This is not anything. No, we can't think like that. The Chinese government is very scared for this to happen. They don't want anybody to know what's happening there. So when we talk about it, like we're talking about it today, when we talk about it and spread the information online, on social media, when we talk about it with people that in person, this is what they don't want. So this is what we have to do. If there's something that they don't want, we must do it. And throughout the last few years, social media has become a powerful tool for sharing information on East Turkestan. A lot of the information we have today is because of social media. They were able to escape, and the information was spread through social media. And what we think of small actions on social media have actually grown as a collection and have become practical policy changes that have helped our brothers and our sisters. We can also boycott Chinese companies such as Huawei, like the ones who make the phones, Huawei. We can boycott them. And Chinese goods, especially Chinese clothing. So there's a lot of clothing made in China. 80% of cotton used in Chinese clothing comes from East Turkestan. And approximately 30% of North American clothing comes from China. So instead of buying clothing made in China, buy clothing made in Vietnam, clothing made in Bangladesh, clothing made elsewhere. From this clothing that comes from China is used from the resources from East Turkestan and from the slave labor of the Uyghurs. So just like we boycott the Israeli companies and the companies like McDonald's and Starbucks who work with Israeli companies and support them, we can also, to help support the brothers and sisters in Palestine, we can also boycott the Chinese companies. And we need to follow those. So there's a brother, I mentioned the website and podcast. There's a brother, his name is Arslan Hidayat. He's on Twitter. We can follow him. There's a website, it's called SaveUyghur.org. There's Kashgar Times, they're on Twitter, and they have a website. And there's the Uyghur Truth Project. So these are all good starting points to follow what's happening and to learn the correct information and to learn what we can do. And the most important thing is to never forget our brothers and our sisters in dua. Our dua is the most important weapon that the Muslim has. Allah Azza wa Jal is always listening to us and is the only one who has any power to change the situation. Imam Shafi'i, it's reported that he said, the dua made at tahajjud is like an arrow which does not miss its target. So we should do tahajjud and make dua for our brothers and sisters in East Turkestan and elsewhere in the world. We need to make sure we do something with our actions. We can't just say, no, in my heart, I hate what's happening. The Prophet ﷺ, he told us in a hadith, whoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand, and if he is not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue, and if he is not able to do so, then with his heart. And he said, وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, that is the weakest of faith. So we can do something with our voice. At least we can do something with our voice. So let's talk about it. We know people, we see other Muslims, let them know this is happening. Spread this information. We will have this video on YouTube and Facebook. Share it with others. Find other videos and other information and share it on social media. Share with people that you know. We have to make sure we do whatever we can. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, what is the matter with you that you do not fight in the cause of Allah for the oppressed people among the men and the women and the children who are saying, our Lord, take us out of this city of oppressive people and appoint for us from yourself a protector and appoint for us from yourself a helper. The people of East Turkestan are like the people of Kashmir. They are calling out to us, the Muslims, saying, help us and take us out of this situation. Take us out of this land where we're being oppressed. So let's do whatever we can, inshallah, to help them, to do whatever we can for them, and spread the message about them, and inshallah, with the help of Allah Azza wa Jal, with our hands, to do something for them. If we don't do anything, we're going to lose. We are going to be a lost people. Let us not be from the people Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, O you who believed, whoever of you should revert from your religion, Allah will bring forth in place of them a people He will love and who will love Him, who are humble towards the believer and strong against the disbeliever. They strive in the cause of Allah and do not fear the blame of the blamers. That is the favor of Allah. He bestows upon it whom He wills, and Allah is all-encompassing and all-knowing. Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us, if we don't act, we have turned our back on the religion. And He's going to replace us with some people better than us, who are going to do something, who are going to be strong against the enemies of Islam. They're going to be compassionate with the Muslims. So let us not be replaced by people who are better than us. Let us be the better people. And let us always remember our brothers and sisters in our du'as. We ask Allah to cure them of their illnesses, to free them from their prisons, to bring victory to the Muslims in East Turkestan and wherever they may be, and to grant victory to the Mujahideen, and to help them in whatever way they need help. I know this was a little bit long, but inshallah it's something that we can remember, and we can make sure that we follow through on a few of the things that I mentioned and that we share this information. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.